I want to talk to you today about building resilience in the face of change. I mean, resilience is important no matter what we're doing, and it's important in all aspects of our life. But specifically, I want to talk to you about resilience in ministry, in being able to survive and thrive in ministry in the long haul, so that we can come through ministry with our heart still intact, that we can come through ministry and we can hear our Lord say to us, "Well done, good and faithful servant. You haven't been burnt out, dropped away, died away. You've actually kept on going." So there are a number of things I want to share with you that will help build resilience. But in order to do that, what I want to do first of all is really just to pull back and to give you a sort of broad, general reminder as to why are we even doing this? What is it that we're even about? I remember recently, I just felt like the Lord reminds me again that this phrase that we use about being a disciple, that we say we are followers of Jesus. He reminded me that this is in fact a very physical activity. You know, when Jesus called his disciples, he then just carried on walking. They actually had to follow him and keep up. You see, one of the things about being a follower of Jesus, it's about keeping up with Jesus. That this is an incredibly physical activity that we have to do. And it's why the disciples of Jesus, in the end, were referred to as the people of the way. In fact, after Jesus had healed people, it says, and then they followed him along the way. They were always trying to follow him and keep up with him. This was quite a strenuous activity. And in this, when you had people come to Jesus and say, "Oh, Jesus, I'll follow you. It sounds great. It sounds wonderful." Jesus actually said these words, you know, "Great, you want to come and follow me? Well, foxes have holes and birds have nests, but the Son of Man has no place to lay his head. If you want to follow me, this is no comfy assignment. There's no home base here for you. This is a world where you keep following, where there is no home you return to. It's a place of discomfort." Now, he called us the people of the way. You know, what's interesting and also really disappointing is that we weren't called people of Netflix and a glass of wine. You know, I think that we could probably have bought into that a whole lot more. It would have been an easier sales pitch. And also, nor did he say that we're people of the book, which again, I'm really disappointed over because I love studying scripture, marinating in the word. This is just wonderful. And if all we had to do was just read and absorb scripture, well, then that would be great. But in fact, it says in 2 Timothy that all scripture is God-breathed and useful for teaching, correcting, and training in righteousness. In fact, our scriptures are there to guide us, to shape us, to change us, to equip us on the way. And so following Jesus isn't easy. Following Jesus actually requires us to keep up with him. But Jesus makes it harder because he kept changing directions. You know, when you read the scriptures, the disciples, the crowds, they kept losing Jesus because he was always off up a mountain somewhere praying, or he decided to cross to the other side of the lake, or his parents even lost him when they went to Jerusalem. Now, John warns us about this by recounting the words of Jesus in John 3:8, where he says, the words of Jesus say, you know, the wind blows wherever it pleases. You hear its sound, but you cannot tell where it comes from or where it's going. So it is with everyone born of the Spirit. And so you see, for us to be followers of Jesus, to understand what we're about in ministry, we actually need to learn to keep up with Jesus. We need to learn how to be fit and flexible in order to follow him in this. We need to be fit to have the stamina to keep up with him, but we also need to be flexible for when he changes the direction on us. And he seems to do it all the time. And yet this is different to what our culture teaches. Our culture teaches us exactly the opposite. Our culture teaches us to be consumers, not followers. Certainly not followers in the way Jesus meant. Followers on Facebook, perhaps, but that's just a different version of consumer. The consumer mindset says, hey, do anything to avoid discomfort. You know, take this pill, eat this food, buy this thing, you'll be great. You know, keep consuming, grow fat, grow lazy, be dissatisfied, just keep consuming. And you see, this isn't what Jesus calls us to. He calls us to be fit and flexible. Now, I remember many years ago when I decided, I thought, you know, I think I need to get fit. So I thought, oh, well, what will I do? I'll start going for runs. So I thought, oh, well, what I'll do is I'll start with a really simple thing. I'll just start with a 5K run. Well, I obviously had way high expectations because starting to do this 5K run, it almost killed me. I dragged myself through it. I came back huffing and puffing. I actually had to lower my expectation and build on it bit by bit by bit. And of course, along the way, because I wasn't fit, my body, my brain was saying, what are you doing? You idiot, stop this. It hurts. Give up. Just don't. But you see, at the time, I had something that was more important than my discomfort. There was something that I valued, something that I wanted, something that I longed for that enabled me to endure this discomfort, to be able to persevere through it. Because if I didn't have that, you know, I just wouldn't. And so you need to know, if you're in this for the long haul, what is your actual passion here? What's your purpose? What are you actually about that can help you through this? You see, this is what we also see of Jesus, as we read about in Hebrews, where it says, because of the joy set before him, he was willing to endure the cross. He had a purpose, a passion that was greater than the sacrifice, than the suffering, than the discomfort of being crucified. And equally, as we are following our Jesus, as we're trying to keep up with him, we have to have it very clear about what are we on about? Why are we actually here doing this that enables us to endure the discomfort? And so in that regard, in order to build resilience in the face of change, one of the real keys here is you've got to be focusing on the right thing. And so often it's easy to get our focus on the wrong thing, but we just don't realize it. Because oftentimes we can be focused on a really good thing. It's just not a God thing. And we've got to bring our focus back to what Jesus would say is important, of what he wants us to achieve in the here and now. And when we've got our focus right, well, this helps with our fitness. This helps us endure and keep on going and not let our heart take too much of a battering. I remember many, many years ago when I was helping out in ministry at a church, and part of what I had set up, part of what I had done here was I had a ministry to young adults, these sort of waifs and strays, these weird and wonderful people. And there were a number of things that I had to do to get ready for the times when we gathered together. And in this, I had one person who lived right on the outskirts of town, miles away. And one of the other members of our group came to me one time and said, hey, look, we live close to them. So I've spoken with our family and my parents, we're happy to pick them up each time. And I thought, that is wonderful. What a joy. And so they did that. And then the next week came around and I said, great, so you're going to go pick them up. And they said, oh, no, we only meant that for one time. No, we weren't going to do that all the time. And I thought, that's not my memory of it. And so I got off the phone with them and I was a bit grumpy and I was resentful. I was thinking, here we go again. Here's another thing that I have to do. I mean, it's not like I haven't got enough things to do here. They're just letting me down. And I felt like the Lord just asked me this simple question in my midst of my grumpiness. And he said, Richard, tell me, why is it good to be you facing this? And I thought for a minute, well, you know, it's not. But as he persevered and just waited for my answer, I thought, well, why is this good? Well, I need to do this because, you know, I'm the leader. It falls back on the leader. I'm leading this group. In fact, I've always wanted to be a leader. I've wanted to lead people to speak into their life. I wanted to be about an influence on people's lives in the way Jesus might want me to be. And so I guess, why is this good? Because this is just a side effect of being a leader. And this is what I've always wanted. And with that, something shifted in my heart. And I went and I picked up that person with no resentment. We had a great conversation. I brought them back. You know, we had the time together, all of that sort of thing. And it went fine. But I needed to keep my heart and my mind focused on the right thing. And you see, we've got to be focused on the right thing to keep the resilience. But oftentimes in our ministry, in churches, in relationships, one of the pitfalls is we end up focusing on what is our preference rather than what's actually value here. When we focus on our preferences, we become competitors. When we focus on what we value, we become allies. And when you focus on what's on your preference, if you were to peel back what your preference is and to go down underneath what's important, you get down to what's really important, what you're really valuing here. I mean, just as a simple example, a kind of simplistic example. Imagine in a church, one person says, hey, what we need is we need all the chairs put together. We don't need an aisle down the middle. That's just silly. Let's put all the chairs together. And another person says, well, no, that's a silly idea. You've got to have an aisle. You need an aisle down the middle, so we're going to have chairs on either side. Now, what each person is speaking about there is, in fact, their preference. And they're speaking about what they think is a good idea. But if you've got that kind of preference, chairs together or an aisle, well, they're mutually exclusive preferences. So you've now got competitors. But if I was to ask each of them, I was to ask the person, tell me, why do you want all the chairs together? What are you valuing here? And they say, well, what's really important to me in all of this is that we have a sense of unity. And if we've got an aisle down the middle, there's a sense of disconnection. We need to have a sense of unity. Okay, I might say. So to the person who wants an aisle, I said, tell me, why do you want an aisle here? They said, well, we've got people in our church with mobility problems, and we don't want them to feel excluded. We don't want them just on the edge. We want them to be able to have access, to feel included in all of this. So really, you want to see, you've got a value of inclusion, which in one sense is just a different expression of unity. Is that right? Yeah. So when you peel it back from your preferences and you get down to what you're valuing, you're actually valuing something that you can both affirm. You're actually valuing something you both agree upon. And now we might think, how could we uphold both values? And so I might say to the person who wants all the chairs together, if we had an aisle, but everyone felt a sense of unity in our congregation, how would that be? Oh, they'd say, well, that would be fine if everyone felt that sense of unity, because that's what the value is. Or if I said to the person who wanted an aisle, if we put all the chairs together, but we find a way that anyone with mobility problems feels included and they can have easy access to feel like they're a part of us, would that be okay? Yeah, sure, they might say. So you need to peel back what your preferences are until you find what is of core value. Until, of course, you clarify, what does Jesus value here? So that we focus on the right things. And as we're focusing on the right things, it builds our fitness in the ministry, in what's happening around us. It also helps us with our flexibility. You know, one of the things I found really interesting here when we had the earthquakes, I spoke with a number of pastors afterwards, and what was interesting is these pastors fell into sort of one of two camps. I would find so many pastors who would end up feeling despondent, disillusioned, because of the earthquakes. And I'd say to them, why? What's going on? And they'd say, well, you see, before the earthquakes, we were praying, we were seeking the Lord, and we had a vision. We knew where we were going for this year. We knew what we were building. But now the earthquakes, it's just disrupted everything. The earthquakes have disrupted. They've been an inconvenience to our ministry, to our vision, and what we're about. And part of me was thinking, if this was a vision from God, it's not like he didn't know that the earthquakes were coming. But there was a different group of people where I'd go to them and I'd say, how are you coping? What's going on for you? They'd say, well, we didn't want the earthquakes. We didn't wish for the earthquakes, but my goodness, what an opportunity. We're involved in our community. We're out there. We're telling people about the love of Jesus, about how he can be hope in difficult times. We're providing food parcels. We're helping clean up people's homes. This is great. And they were like pigs in mud. And you see, because one of them was focused on the right thing, on the core things that Jesus wanted them to be about. And as they focused on it, they could do that. They could be flexible no matter what the context. But those who were fixed with their vision, with their plan, with their strategy, with what they wanted, then they just found the change of context was a disruption and an interruption to their ministry. You see, in trying to find what's the right thing here, there's a story I love to recount, which when I talk to different organizations, when I talk to different churches about how they're functioning, I invariably come back to this because I just find it so useful. And it's the story of the Boston Drillbit company. And you see, I don't know if you know this, but the Boston Drillbit company many, many years ago led the world in making the best, the finest drill bits in the world. And in fact, they led the market in making these best drill bits. But then as time went on, their market share began to drop off and they weren't doing so well. And their CEO left and they got a new CEO. And the new CEO got them all together and said, tell me, what's our purpose here? What are we on about? What are we here for? And all the managers got together and they had a conversation and discussion. And they came back and they said, we're here to make the finest drill bits in the world. No, the best drill bits that anyone else has seen. And the CEO said, no, that's not why we're here at all. We're here to make holes. And with that, as they realized that, and they thought, well, and what's the best way to make holes? They in fact went into laser technology and their market share took off. You see, if they got caught focusing on making the best drill bits, that could have been their vision. But in fact, they would have lost out. Whereas in fact, when you focus on what the whole is, you realize the drill bit is just a means to an end. And so, of course, the question we've got to ask is, Jesus, what's the whole here? What's the aim? What's the purpose? And what's the drill bit? Because vision serves values. Otherwise, you can end up with a vision that an earthquake can disrupt. But when the vision serves the values, then it always reshapes itself for the context to make sure the values are being expressed, to make sure holes are still being made. Now, of course, what can be pitfalls here, what can be obstacles in all of this, is, of course, that we can end up focusing on completely the wrong things. Like I said, we can end up focusing on good things, but it's just not a God thing. We can end up focusing on what our nostalgia tells us or what our past success has told us. You know, in the past, we made the best drill bits in the world. Well, that's great. Let's celebrate that. But that's not actually going to help us. That's not necessarily the best way to make a hole today. And it may be in the past that we had the best Sunday schools, the best children's ministry, the best young adults ministry, the best families ministry, the best seniors ministry, the best whatever ministry. And great, let's celebrate that. But let's realize that the way that we did it was just a drill bit. The key thing that we've got to keep our eye on, the focus on, is what's the whole? We need to focus on the right thing. And as we focus on that right thing of what really is of value, it gives us the stamina, the fitness, and it also gives us the flexibility to follow Jesus when he changes or when the context changes or the situation changes. So know what he values and let that become our passion here. The other thing that we need to understand here that I teach people in being able to endure through the changes that they're facing is you've got to understand the change process. And so one of the things that I teach people is there's this process like orientation, disorientation, reorientation. Now, really what that means is when you start out in your anxious state, your addicted state, your insecure state, your ministry state, whatever it might be, you're orientated to that way. You know how to do that. You can see how that may be. But there may be a frustration. That's not actually what you want. You want something different, something better. And as you're changing, the next phase, the next state you go into is one of disorientation. I mean, you sort of knew how to do the other thing, but it's hard to know, how do you do this thing? And the common experience when you're in the disorientation is this feels weird. This just feels odd. Now, rather than running from that, know that that's perfect. That means you're changing. I had one husband who was learning to be more vulnerable, open up, share with his wife, be more present with his wife. And he was doing it. And he said, but this just feels horrible. This just doesn't feel like me. I mean, Richard, tell me, what do I do next? I said, I know. I can tell you exactly. He says, good, because I don't like being like this. I said, the thing that you do next is you stay put. You stay put in the disorientation until it doesn't feel odd. You stay put until it becomes familiar. It becomes your new normal. And when you've done that, you now move to the next phase where you're reorientated, where you're now seeing and being in a different way. It is your new normal here. And so many people, one of the problems here though, is when people hit that disorientation phase where they go, I don't know how to do this. This is weird. One of the primary obstacles is fear. Fear of the unknown. I mean, I knew how to be me in the old way. I may not have liked that, but I don't know how to be me in this. And the unknown just feels scary. I mean, anything could be in the unknown. I'm not in control of the unknown. But it's recognizing the unknown is just unfamiliar. It's not dangerous like it feels. It's just something new to get used to. It might be that you fear the loss of my identity. I don't know who I am. The loss of my significance. I used to be someone. I don't feel like anyone in this. Maybe I don't feel like I belong, or I've got control, or I've got influence. This certainly doesn't feel comfortable. And you see, in this fear, in the disorientation phase, what people will do, because it all feels unknown and it all feels a bit scary, is they'll run back to the orientation phase. They'll run back to what they're used to, what they're familiar with, even if they know it's not the best. And we read in Scripture, this is why it says, and a dog will return to its vomit. I mean, it's not very pretty, but at least it is what we know. Whereas in this, we need to recognize that discomfort, this disorientation, this weird feeling. This is good. This is where we should be. But of course, how do we help ourselves overcome the fear and hang in there in the disorientation phase? And of course, we read in Scripture that perfect love drives out fear. We also read in Galatians, the only thing that counts is faith expressing itself through love. It's this love thing that helps us to stick in there and to hold in there, even when things just feel so odd, so horrible in this. That love helps us to combat fear. I heard it said at one point, love expands. Love expands us. Love expands our horizon. Love expands our welcome. But fear restricts. Fear closes us off. Fear says, it makes my world even smaller because it's just too scary to have other people there. And so part of what we need to help us through the fear phase is we've got to come back to this motivation of love. And I mean the real kind of love, not the soppy Disney kind of love. I'm talking the 1 Corinthians 13 kind of love, this gritty, robust kind of love. You know, what's really interesting about 1 Corinthians 13, and this may come as a surprise to you, is that it occurs smack bang in the middle of 1 Corinthians 12 and 1 Corinthians 14. I know, go figure. But what's interesting about chapters 12 and 14 is they are about how the body should operate. And chapter 13 is about the motivation by which we will operate. Hey, we can do lots of great things, we can sacrifice a lot, but if our heart isn't motivated by love, I mean genuine love, it's worthless. We're not going to stick together. It's not going to enable us to get through. We're going to deteriorate back onto what we want, to our preferences here. But you see, love expands us and fear restricts us. Our love expands us. It stretches us beyond myself. So when Jesus calls me to love, wow, it goes to work on my fleshly side. It refines my character. It shows me where I've still got work to do. Love expands and stretches us. And sometimes, literally. I remember my wife, after having our 3rd child, was looking at her stretch marks, slightly disappointed by what she was seeing there. And I said to her, honey, as far as I'm concerned, these are a tangible expression of your love for our kids. You know, when she looked at it that way, she realized, yeah, this is what I'm prepared to sacrifice and give up, amongst many other things. Because my kids, because I wanted children in this world. And of course, as we allow kids into our life and our words, I mean, I don't know about you, but my kids have just ruined me. They've enhanced my world, but they ruined my very self-centered, very neat, ordered, organized world. It caused me to become more than I am, and it was not comfortable. I didn't know how to be a dad. I didn't know how to be this husband with children. It was unpleasant. But the love that welcomed the kids said, I'm prepared to endure this discomfort, this disorientation until I work it out, until I figure it out. But of course, fear restricts us. And this is what we see with Peter. You know, in Galatians, Paul says, hey, I had to confront Peter because he was being the great apostle, and then the Jews turned up and he pretended to be a Jew again. And I said, dude, what are you on about? This is interfering with the gospel. This is hypocrisy. But of course, his fear of being judged, of not being respected or liked, just caused him to restrict what he was doing. And it restricted the ministry. It restricted the advancement of the gospel. And so, of course, Paul got in his face as a result. So if we're going to get through this, if we're going to find a sense of resilience, and we face the fear that will naturally come up, a fear of the unknown, a fear of this is weird, a fear of, hang on a second, I haven't got the influence, the control, the sense of belonging like I thought I had. We need to let love be our motivation that stretches us, and of course, highlights where our fleshly side is that still needs to be refined to become more like him. So in building this resilience in the face of change, know what your passion is, your purpose is, and let that overcome the discomfort. What are you focused on? You know, as I said, it's interesting that Jesus was willing to endure the cross. The word passion means to suffer for. And when we've got something that we're passionate about, when we're passionate about the things that Jesus is passionate about, it gives us the strength to overcome the discomfort. But we also have to understand the change process. We also got to understand this disorientation, this weird state, this is normal. This is good. This is where I should be. And I've just got to stay put in it. And as I do so, and as I face the fears and my own fleshly stuff that comes to the surface, let my love for someone, something greater than me, help me get through my disorientation. Let that be my motivation for the ministry, and know that it will stretch me. And in ministry terms as well, I'm going to have a few stretch marks that enable me to accommodate others, that accommodate the difference, that accommodate Jesus changing directions on us, which is just so infuriating. But also, what I would also encourage you to do is you've got to get resourced for the journey. And so as you know your passion, you're focused on the right thing, as you understand the change process, as you're allowing love to guide you, you still need your stuff to replenish you, to support you. You might need a companion to reassure you that you're not insane, that this is all good. You might need prayer, some key scriptures to help you through. You might need your leadership to communicate clearly with you as to what's going on and to clarify how, again, this fits in with our key purpose. That's all fine. Ask what you need. But to build this resilience, focus on the right thing. Your passion, the purpose, the things that Jesus values. Know the change process and grow your love that expands you. But also ask for what you need, what you want, that enables you to be resourced in the journey. So my friends, that's me for today. So I'm going to pause me now and throw it open to you guys to ask your questions. What questions do you have for me in this whole process of gaining resilience in the face of change? First and foremost, I would go back to, have you clarified the ultimate purpose and value of why you're doing what you're doing? Oftentimes with leaders, we already own this stuff and we can see what Jesus is doing. That means we want to bring the change. And so we then just tell people about structural changes and we tell them that'll all be good. But they need to be anchored in the key purpose. They need to be anchored in the why we're doing this. And so painting the big picture of if this goes well, this is what we're trying to achieve, but also bringing it back and telling them stories about what Jesus did and asking them to consider how that might be in our terms of our ministry. Also, it's sharing with them perhaps the Boston Drillbit company and getting them to consider, can we see how this might be just a different way of creating a whole? And if we find a better way to create a whole, well, we'll do that. So that the people first and foremost understand the reason and the rationale behind it. And in doing that, you'll probably do this naturally, but you need to speak in the language of their meaning. So if they love what the Spirit does in people's lives, then use the language of the Spirit. If they love Scripture, then use the language of Scripture. If they love being followers of Jesus or seeing people come to faith, then use that language. Use the language that means something to them so that they realize that what you're doing is you're joining this unknown new way, new place where you want to take them with what's already known. So then it's not a huge step forward. But if you simply talk about structural changes and you haven't connected it to their sources of meaning and what's important to them, then they're going to be lost and then they'll probably drift away. So I would say focus first and foremost on that. Things that I would suggest is allow people into the conversation about the journey of change. And what I mean by that is pointing out why things might need to change, pointing out where we're actually trying to head, and even getting them to brainstorm how we might get there better so that they have more ownership over this, certainly connect to their sources of meaning. And the other thing that's often good to do is speak into their lives about the treasure that's in them. And that's about the gifts that they have, the things that they bring, of what you see that they carry that's of value. And again, connect that to what you're doing so that you talk about how important their role is and where you see them fitting, not necessarily specifically in a structural sense, you might do that, but in terms of what they bring into the mix. So they know that they're valued, they're able to have a contribution, even if you don't go that way, and also that they're connected to the purpose through their own sources of meaning. Those sort of things can also be helpful. And touching base with them along the way to ask them about their fears. So, how are you going with this? Oh, it's not easy. It's not what I remember. Empathize and also ask them, and what would help you to feel more comfortable, more reassured in this? Because we're not going back to the old drill bit. But tell me, in moving forward with this new whole making machine, what would help you to feel reassured that you're needed, you're valued, and you're heading in a godly direction?